She had spent most of her life looking up at the sky, wondering what it would feel like to rise above everything, to see the world from a place untouched by fear. She had watched birds glide through the air with ease, had seen balloons drift lazily across the morning sky, and had listened to others speak of flying with awe in their voices. But for Clara, these dreams belonged to other people. At 76, she believed that her feet were destined to stay firmly planted on the ground. Heights were not just uncomfortable for her, they were terrifying. The thought of standing on a balcony made her heart race. The idea of climbing a ladder, even just a few steps, made her palms sweat. She had spent years avoiding elevators with glass walls, bridges with open sides, and even the second story of shopping malls. Fear had shaped her life in ways that others couldn't see. It had been with her since childhood, a shadow she could never quite shake. When she was 8, she had climbed a tree on a dare, and halfway up, she froze, unable to move, paralyzed by the sheer distance between her and the ground. It took her father an hour to coax her down, and from that moment on, something inside her closed. She learned quickly how to say no to anything that brought her too close to the sky. She smiled through invitations to hikes with high viewpoints, politely declined rooftop dinners, and never once allowed herself to consider flying. But despite her fear, she had always dreamed of seeing the world from above. There was something about the thought of floating in silence, with nothing but sky around her, that called to her in a way she couldn't explain. As a little girl, she would lie in the grass and watch the clouds, imagining herself drifting with them, weightless, free. That dream never truly left her. It stayed, quietly, tucked away behind all the reasons she had to stay grounded. Now, at 76, Clara felt the weight of all those years of waiting. She had lived a good life, raised a family, cared for others, found joy in simple things. But there was something missing, something she couldn't ignore anymore. The fear that had once protected her now felt like a cage. She didn't want to live the rest of her days wondering what might have been. She didn't want to look back and see all the places she hadn't gone, all the dreams she hadn't touched. She didn't want to live in fear anymore. And what gave her the courage to rise above her greatest fear? That part of her story was just about to begin. If you've ever felt that kind of fear, the kind that holds you back from something beautiful, maybe you'll understand what Clara was about to do. If you're still here, feel free to subscribe. Because sometimes, the life we want is waiting just beyond the thing we fear most. Clara's fear of heights didn't come from nowhere. It had lived with her, quietly but persistently, for as long as she could remember. She had been a timid child, cautious in ways that other children didn't understand. While her friends ran up hills and climbed fences, she stayed back, watching from a safe distance, her feet planted firmly on the ground. The world above always felt like another place, one she didn't belong to. The sky was for birds, for airplanes, for people braver than her. Her first real memory of fear came when she was just 7 years old. It was summer, and her older brother had convinced her to climb the tall oak tree in their backyard. At first, it was exciting, her small hands gripping the rough bark, her feet finding places to stand as she rose higher. But then, a sudden gust of wind rocked the branches, and she made the mistake of looking down. The ground seemed impossibly far, the air too thin, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. She couldn't move. Her brother had to climb up and guide her down, one trembling step at a time. After that, something inside her shifted. She avoided heights whenever she could, and when she couldn't, she endured them with white-knuckled fear. As she grew older, the fear didn't fade. It grew with her, taking root in her life in small but powerful ways. She refused to go on the Ferris wheel at the fair, even though her friends begged her to try. She chose apartments on the ground floor. She never learned to ride a bike because the idea of falling terrified her more than missing out ever did. And yet, despite all this, there was always a quiet longing to see the world from above. She remembered hearing a neighbor talk about a hot air balloon ride, how peaceful it was, How beautiful the earth looked from so high. The idea filled her with wonder and dread at the same time. Her life moved forward, filled with the ordinary joys and sorrows that come with time. She married, raised children, and built a life that was safe, predictable. Her husband, kind and steady, understood her fears, never pushing her beyond what she could handle. But he dreamed of flying too. They would sometimes sit together, watching hot air balloons in the early morning sky, and he would say, "One day, we should do that." She would smile, but inside, the answer was always no. Not for her. Never for her. Now, years later, with her husband gone and her children grown, the dreams they once shared came back to her in quiet moments. The fear was still there, but something else was growing too, a restless feeling, a desire to break free of the limits she had set for herself long ago. She thought about that child frozen in the tree, about all the times she had said no when her heart whispered yes. And she began to wonder, what if she didn't say no this time? Clara had always been the careful one. While others chased adventure, she chased certainty. Through her teenage years, her 20s, and into adulthood, her fear of heights shaped more of her life than she liked to admit. It wasn't just about tall buildings or ladders. It was about anything that felt unstable, anything that lifted her off solid ground. She avoided bridges with open sides, refused invitations to rooftop gatherings, and never once considered stepping onto an airplane. People around her understood, or at least they said they did, but Clara often wondered what it was like to live without that fear constantly whispering in your ear. Her life was full in many ways. She married young, to a man named Walter, whose feet were planted just as firmly on the ground as hers. They shared a quiet life, full of routines and small joys. Sunday dinners, walks in the park, gardening together in the backyard. Walter respected her fears, never pushing, never questioning why she needed both feet on the earth. And yet, every now and then, he'd look to the sky when hot air balloons passed overhead, and with a playful smile, he'd say, "Someday, wouldn't it be something to float up there?" Clara would laugh, shake her head, and say, "You'll have to go without me." But Walter never did. As the years went by, the world changed around her. Her children grew, moved away, started lives of their own. Walter's health declined slowly, until one winter morning, he was gone. Clara was left in the same house, surrounded by memories, and for the first time in her life, the fear of being alone was louder than her fear of heights. She began to notice the sky more after that. The way the sunrise painted it in soft pinks and golds, the way the clouds drifted like dreams she'd never dared to chase. And then there were the balloons, always the balloons, floating silently in the early morning light, so graceful, so free. The dream she had once laughed off with Walter began to tug at her. She found herself lingering on travel shows that showed people in hot air balloons, their faces glowing with wonder as they rose higher and higher. She would sit in her chair, gripping the armrests, heart pounding as if she were there with them. And yet, even as fear filled her, something else stirred. What would it feel like to let go? What would it mean to face the very thing that had kept her grounded for so long? Clara didn't have the answer yet, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to live the rest of her life ruled by fear. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting. The idea might have stayed just that, an idea, if not for a small moment that seemed ordinary at first. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those days when the air feels heavy with memory, and Clara was sorting through an old box of photographs. She had pulled it down from the top shelf in her closet, thinking she'd do some cleaning, maybe even toss a few things. But as she sat on the living room floor, pictures spread around her, she stumbled upon one she hadn't seen in years. It was a photograph of Walter standing in their backyard, a young Clara by his side. They were both smiling, squinting into the sunlight, and behind them, almost lost in the corner of the frame, was a hot air balloon drifting lazily through the sky. Clara stared at the image for a long time, her fingers tracing the outline of the balloon. She could almost hear his voice. Wouldn't it be something to float up there? Her heart ached. It wasn't just about the balloon, or the sky, or the fear. It was about him, about the life they had shared, about the dreams they had set aside. She thought of all the times she had said no, of all the gentle invitations he had never pressed, of how he had loved her even with her fears. And she realized, in that moment, that part of her still wanted to say yes. Not for him, not just to honor his memory, but for herself. Later that week, her granddaughter Emily came to visit. Bright, lively, and full of ideas, Emily had a way of bringing light into Clara's quiet house. Over tea, they chatted about life, about the little things, until Clara, almost without thinking, said, "Have you ever been in a hot air balloon?" Emily's eyes lit up. "No, but I've always wanted to." "What?" Clara hesitated, the words strange on her tongue. "I've been thinking about it. About maybe going up in one." Emily leaned in, her smile wide. "Grandma, that would be amazing. You should. Let's find a place. I'll go with you if you want." Clara laughed nervously. "I don't know. I'm not sure I can." But the idea had already taken root. That night, she lay in bed, the photograph of Walter now sitting on her nightstand, and she imagined what it would feel like to finally let go, to rise, to float, to see the world from above. And for the first time in her life, the thought of flying didn't fill her with dread. It filled her with longing. She didn't know how, or when, or even if she truly could, but she knew she wanted to try. The decision wasn't final, not yet. It hovered in Clara's mind like the very balloon she now found herself watching more and more often, floating, waiting, just out of reach. But something inside her had shifted. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of rising above the earth, of facing the very thing that had held her captive for so long, was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a possibility. The next morning, Clara stood by the window, watching the sky turn from pale blue to gold as the sun climbed higher. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. There was fear there. Yes, deep, old, familiar. But there was also something else. A spark. A question she couldn't ignore anymore. What if I don't try? What will I miss? Emily called that afternoon, her voice bright with excitement. "Grandma, I looked up some balloon rides. There's a place just outside town that does them at sunrise. It's beautiful. We could go and just watch first, see how you feel." Clara's heart beat faster at the thought. "Watch, yes. I could do that." "Great," Emily said. "I'll pick you up this weekend." As the days passed, Clara began to prepare in her own quiet way. She started walking a little more, just around the block, trying to steady her body, to feel her legs strong beneath her. She spent evenings reading about hot air balloons, about how safe they were, about how the rides were gentle, slow, peaceful. Not like planes, not fast or loud. Just floating, drifting with the wind. She spoke to no one else about it. Not yet. It was too fragile, this new hope. But every night, she looked at the photo of Walter and whispered, "I'm thinking about it." Saturday arrived, and with it, the first real step. Emily arrived early, a thermos of coffee in hand, her energy filling the room. Clara dressed carefully, choosing her most comfortable shoes, wrapping a light scarf around her neck. She felt nervous, her hands shaking slightly, but she smiled. The drive to the launch site was quiet, the sky still dark, the air cool with the promise of morning. As they arrived, Clara saw them. The balloons, large and colorful, slowly filling with air, rising like sleeping giants waking with the sun. She stood still, watching, her breath caught in her throat. They were beautiful, and they didn't seem frightening. They seemed peaceful. Emily stayed close, her hand gently resting on Clara's arm. "Just look," she said softly. No pressure. As the first balloon lifted into the sky, Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Longing. She could do this. She wanted to do this. And maybe, just maybe, she would. Clara sat on the bench near the launch site long after the balloons had risen and drifted into the distance, their colors melting into the pale morning sky. She hadn't spoken much, but Emily had stayed by her side, sensing that something important was unfolding in her grandmother's heart. Watching those balloons rise so gently, so quietly, had stirred something Clara hadn't felt in a long time. A deep ache for something more, something beyond the walls she had built around herself for decades. On the drive home, Clara finally spoke. "I want to try." Emily looked over, surprised but smiling. "You mean go up? Really?" Clara nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can, but I want to try." And with that simple sentence, the decision was made. That night, Clara didn't sleep much. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The fear was still there, a constant companion, whispering all the reasons she should stay on the ground. What if she panicked? What if something went wrong? But louder than fear, for the first time, was curiosity. What if it was beautiful? What if she felt free? What if, just once, she could rise above everything that had held her back? The next morning, Emily called the balloon company. "They have an opening next week," she told Clara. "Sunrise. It'll be just a small group. Very safe. You don't have to decide right now." But Clara didn't hesitate. "Book it." The days that followed were filled with a kind of nervous energy Clara hadn't known in years. She moved through her routines, morning tea, tending to her plants, reading by the window, but everything felt different, sharper, more alive. She was scared, of course, but she was also proud. She had said yes. As the day approached, her anxiety grew. She questioned herself 100 times. She imagined every detail, the basket, the flame, the moment her feet would leave the ground. She even considered calling it off once or twice. But each time, she remembered the feeling she had watching those balloons lift into the sky. The peace, the quiet strength. The night before the flight, Clara sat at her kitchen table with the photo of Walter in her hands. She traced his smile, remembering all the times he had dreamed for both of them. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'm going to do it." The morning came, cool and clear. Emily picked her up in the dark, and together they drove back to the same field, now familiar but filled with new meaning. Clara's hands trembled as she stepped from the car, but her steps were steady. The balloon was already half inflated, its colors glowing softly in the early light. The pilot greeted them warmly, explaining everything with calm reassurance. Clara listened, her heart pounding, but something in his voice soothed her. When it was time to step into the basket, Clara paused. Emily reached out, her eyes full of love. "You don't have to, Grandma." But Clara smiled. "Yes, I do." And she took that first step. The moment her feet left the ground, Clara felt her breath catch in her chest. The basket rose slowly, gently, but her heart pounded as if she had leapt off a cliff. She gripped the edge tightly, her knuckles white, eyes wide as the earth began to slip away beneath her. The voices around her, the pilot's calm instructions, Emily's soft encouragement, faded into the background, lost beneath the roar of her own fear. But then something unexpected happened. Nothing. There was no jolt, no sudden drop, no dizzying spin. Just stillness. The balloon rose like a whisper, smooth and quiet, as if the sky had opened up just for her. Clara dared to glance down, her heart racing, but what she saw didn't terrify her. It mesmerized her. The world was smaller now, fields stretching out in patchwork greens and browns, roads curling through the land like silver ribbons, trees swaying far below. The wind was cool on her face, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting the sky in soft pinks and golds. She loosened her grip, her hands trembling not with fear now, but with awe. Clara looked at Emily, who was watching her closely, her eyes full of pride. "You're doing it," Emily whispered. Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I am." The higher they went, the lighter she felt. The fear that had clung to her for 76 years, that had whispered no to so many things, seemed to fall away, left behind on the ground far below. Up here, there was no room for it. There was only space, only light, only freedom. For the first time, Clara let go completely. She stood tall in the basket, her hands resting gently on the edge, and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. She looked out, not just down, and saw the horizon stretching endlessly before her. The beauty was overwhelming, the silence, the grace of it all. This, she thought, is what it feels like to live. The flight lasted less than an hour, but to Clara, it felt like stepping into another lifetime. Each moment in the sky was a gift, a promise that she had kept to herself, a dream finally realized. She didn't think about fear anymore. She didn't think about age or time or the long years she had spent holding herself back. She thought about how light her heart felt, how proud Walter would have been, how much more she could still feel, still see, still do. As the balloon began its gentle descent, Clara looked down once more, not with dread, but with gratitude. She had faced her greatest fear and found something waiting for her on the other side. Not just courage, but joy. When the basket touched the ground, and she stepped out, her legs a little unsteady but her spirit soaring, Clara turned to Emily and smiled, the sun now high above them. I did it, and she knew she would never be the same. The drive home was quiet, but not in the way Clara had known silence before. This silence was full of wonder, of peace, of something too big to put into words. She sat beside Emily, the cool breeze still clinging to her skin, the warmth of the rising sun lingering on her face. Her hands rested softly in her lap, no longer shaking, but calm, steady. She glanced out the window, watching the world pass by in a way she had never seen it before. Everything felt different now, brighter, clearer, more alive. Emily kept stealing glances at her, her smile gentle, proud. "How are you feeling?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Clara looked at her, eyes still glistening from the tears she hadn't tried to hide. "Like I left something behind up there," she said. "Something I don't need anymore." Emily nodded, understanding more than Clara expected. They didn't need to talk much after that. The silence between them was comfortable, rich with meaning. When they arrived home, Clara stepped out of the car slowly, her body tired but her heart still soaring. She stood for a moment outside her front door, taking in the small garden she had tended for years, the familiar creak of the gate, the chirping of birds she had heard every morning. Everything was the same, but nothing was. Inside, she made herself a cup of tea, her usual ritual, but as she sat by the window, she didn't reach for her book, or her knitting, or even the familiar thoughts that had once filled her mind. She sat, simply, breathing, remembering. Later that day, her son called. "Hi, Mom. Emily told me something about a balloon ride. Is that true?" Clara chuckled, the sound light, almost surprised at herself. "It's true." There was a pause, then laughter on the other end. "I can't believe it. You really did it." "I did. I was scared, but I did it." "You're amazing," he said. "I wish Dad could have seen you." "So do I," she replied, her voice soft but strong. "But I think he knew I would, one day." The next days were filled with small moments of reflection. Neighbors heard about her adventure and came by, curious and inspired. Clara told her story humbly, but with a quiet pride she had never known. Each time she spoke about it, the fear seemed further away, like a shadow that had finally lost its hold. She realized something simple but profound. Fear had not protected her. It had only kept her from seeing what was possible. And now, with that fear behind her, the world felt open in a way it never had before. Clara didn't feel younger, exactly, but she felt more alive than she had in years. She had faced her greatest fear and found freedom waiting. Clara sat by the window as evening settled in, the sky outside painted in soft shades of lavender and gold. The world was quiet, but inside her, There was a lightness she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just about the balloon ride, about the heights she had once feared. It was about everything that moment had given her. For 76 years, she had let fear decide. Fear of falling, fear of failing, fear of losing control. But now, for the first time, she understood something simple and powerful. Fear had never really been about heights. It had been about holding herself back from life. And now, she wouldn't anymore. She had looked her fear in the face, and she had risen above it, quite literally. She had felt the wind, seen the world from above, and realized that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. It wasn't about being brave in some grand, fearless way. It was about choosing to take one step, then another, even when your hands shake and your heart races. It was about trusting that something beautiful might be waiting on the other side of fear. As the last light faded from the sky, Clara stood, stretched, and smiled. She didn't need to chase anything more to prove her worth. She didn't need to fight fear every day to be free. She had done enough. And knowing she could, that was everything. She had lived with fear, and now she would live beyond it. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe you understand what Clara felt. Maybe there's something you've carried for years, a fear, a doubt, a quiet voice saying, "You can't." But I hope, now, you hear something else. You can. You can take the first step. You can rise. Because it's never too late to live beyond your fears. If Clara's story touched you, leave a comment. Tell us, what fear do you still want to overcome? Like this video if you believe courage can come at any age. And subscribe, because here, we believe every dream is worth chasing. It's never too late to dream. And it's never too late to fly.